Welcome to Gaming Bench, I'm your host, Mr. Bench.
Today's game is God of War Ragnarök.
It's basically 2 years old now, but it just finally released for the PC. I'd say it's about time, but having Sony publish its own first-party games for PC at all is pretty amazing, so I won't complain.
The test area is the realm of Svartalfheim, one of the more demanding areas of the game.
It's been cleared of monsters now, so nothing will interfere with the benchmarks, but you'll see in the video as I'm running the same path each time that the frame rates can drop quite a bit in some areas. This is about as bad as it gets when running Ragnarok, and most other locations will perform better than this. Before I get to the performance results, I need to call shenanigans. I started testing in a different region when the game unlocked last week. Then patch number 2 dropped, and I noticed that Nvidia cards seemed suddenly slower. You can see the RTX 4070 running before and after the patch here. At 1080p with medium settings, it was getting 183 FPS originally, and now it's getting 138 FPS. That's not just a little bit slower, that's a massive 25% drop. It's not quite as bad at ultra settings and higher resolutions, so 1080p Ultra for instance is only 14% slower and 1440p Ultra runs just 9% slower. That's still a bad look, and I don't have an answer as to what happened, but it means AMD's GPUs look better versus Nvidia's GPUs, so I felt I had to mention it. Hopefully another patch soon rectifies the situation. I'll start with 1080p medium, using my new Svartalfheim test location. With the budget GPUs, the RX 6600 and RTX 3058GB, AMD leads by just over 20%. That's not unusual for these GPUs, but the gap will diminish quite a bit once I get to the ultra testing. Stepping up to the RTX 4060 and RX 7600 XT, the two GPUs are basically tied, so this isn't going to be a game where AMD dominates at every level. The extra VRAM on the 7600 XT likely isn't a factor at medium settings though. The RTX 4070 and RX 7900 GRE are back to AMD pummeling the opposition, with a 37% lead. 10 to 15% isn't out of the ordinary with these GPUs, but God of War Ragnarök after patch number 2 clearly lands in outlier territory. In fact, the 7900 GRE even outpaces Nvidia's RTX 4080 Super, which truly shouldn't be happening. Need I mention that this is a game originally developed to run on AMD hardware and that it's AMD promoted? Yeah, you probably figured that out already. The RTX 4080 Super and RTX 7900 XTX is another landslide victory for AMD. This is a pure rasterization game, and normally these two GPUs are pretty evenly matched. And it's not just the RTX 4080 Super. The 7900 XTX can even take down the mighty RTX 4090 at 1080p medium at least. Here's the overall chart where you can see all the GPUs compared. Nvidia's definitely underperforming right now, which wasn't the case when I first started testing. The patch notes explicitly mention DLSS fixes, but this probably isn't the sort of fix people were looking for. The next stop is at 1080p Ultra, and the true budget cards already start to struggle. Interestingly, the RTX 3050 now easily beats the RX 6600. Even though both GPUs have 8GB of memory, it seems AMD's card has run out of VRAM and just isn't coping with the demands very well. Nvidia's GPUs that have 8GB don't seem to have any issues though. The RTX 4060 now zips past the RX 7600 XT. Okay, it's only a 10% lead, but these cards were tied at 1080p medium, and the extra memory on the 7600 XT often becomes beneficial at higher quality settings. The RTX 4070 and RX 7900 GRE are closer as well, this time with AMD leading by just 13%. That's within the usual range, so perhaps it's only medium quality that really suffered with the patch. Except, as noted earlier, the 4070 was 14% slower post-patch at 1080p Ultra. Without the drop it would have a lead over AMD's GPU. And wrapping things up with the fastest cards, the RTX 4080 Super still can't close the gap with the 7900 XTX. AMD's card runs nearly 20% faster, with less stuttering and a far more stable minimum FPS. The RTX 4090 does claim top honors this time, averaging 150 frames per second, but it's only 5% faster than the XTX and 1% lows still favor the AMD GPU. Overall, there's a much larger spread now between the fastest and slowest GPUs, and that's to be expected. Extreme performance GPUs often hit CPU bottlenecks at lower resolutions and settings, which brings us to 1440p Ultra testing. We'll skip the 3050 and 6600 this time and jump straight to the RTX 4060 and RX 7600 XT. Nvidia's GPU still delivers slightly faster performance than the AMD card even at 1440p, so the 8GB of VRAM still isn't holding it back. Also, the Navi 33 GPU in the 7600 XT just isn't very potent with only 32 compute units. The 7900 GRE still beats the RTX 4070, with the same 13% margin of victory. Minimum FPS also favors AMD's card, perhaps because of the extra VRAM, though also the Nvidia cards just seem to stutter quite a bit more since patch number 2 arrived last Saturday. Did I mention the shenanigans? RTX 4080 Super and RX 7900 XTX are much closer now, and Nvidia is starting to reel in AMD's $900 card. The XTX still leads by 11%, but these are also cards that are intended for running 4K, so we'll have to see what happens there next. And the RTX 4090 sits on its throne, surveying the GPU domain and letting everyone know what a $1,600 GPU can do. I can't wait to see how much the RTX 5090 costs when it comes out. Looking at the 1440p chart, it's basically the end of the road for the 3050 and 6600. Turning on upscaling and frame gen can help, of course, and I did check 1440p with those. The 3050 managed a much more palatable 55 FPS that way, while the 6600 still landed in the mid-30s, and because of frame gen, that means the actual input is only running in the teens, so it's not exactly a good experience. 4K finally sees the RX 7600 XT catch back up to the RTX 4060, with both averaging 28 FPS. However, I also noticed that if you play for a while, the 4060 can start to slow down at 4K, restarting the game will restore the lost performance. VRAM definitely starts to matter at 4K native, not that either card runs particularly well at this setting. The 7900 GRE and RTX 4070 continue as before, with AMD holding onto its 14% lead. That's about right for 4K Ultra, as the 16GB of memory helps, and as noted, this is an AMD promoted game. The 4080 Super and 7900 XTX Extreme GPUs end up just about tied now, with the XTX clinging to a single FPS lead. AMD doesn't dip below 60 FPS on minimums though, so the 7900 XTX is still a better experience overall. As for the RTX 4090, it now manages its biggest lead yet, outpacing the 7900 XTX by over 20%. And it's worth noting that only these top two GPUs manage to consistently stay above 60 FPS. Here's the chart for 4K native. Without any results for the RX 6600, it was simply too slow to warrant further testing at 4K. All of the GPUs now line up in pretty much the normal fashion, which certainly wasn't the case at lower resolutions and settings. Finally, I'll wrap up with upscaling and FrameGen testing results at 4K Ultra. Both FSR 3.1 and DLSS are available, and that means you can even use DLSS upscaling with FSR 3 FrameGen, a neat trick, that. And we've done some extra testing because of that feature. So Nvidia's GPUs can run with DLSS upscaling in either FSR or DLSS FrameGen, at least on the 40 series. The RTX 3050 can even do DLSS with FSR FrameGen this way, which we'll see in the chart. But looking at the RTX 4060 and RX 7600 XT, which have been chugging along in the background while I ramble, AMD's card now holds a clear lead, likely because it has twice the VRAM. Just as interesting perhaps is that the 4060 performs better overall with FSR FrameGen rather than DLSS 3 FrameGen. I won't say AMD's FrameGen looks better, but it does deliver a smoother look and higher performance. That goes for all of the RTX 40 series GPUs. Incidentally, they all do better with FSR FrameGen. The 7900 GR easily beats the 4070 running pure DLSS upscaling and FrameGen, 120 FPS compared to just 80 FPS. But use DLSS upscaling with FSR FrameGen and the 4070 gets about a 10% bump to 96 FPS. It's not enough to close the gap, but it's a better result overall. AMD continues to benefit the most from upscaling and FrameGen at the extreme GPU level as well. The 7900 XTX hits 170 FPS, easily beating the 4080 Super's 124 FPS by 37%. Using DLSS with FSR FrameGen closes the gap a bit, so that AMD only has a 16% lead, but it's still a decisive win for the red team. And yeah, I keep thinking about that patch number 2 and the nerfed Nvidia performance. The 7900 XTX can even keep pace with the RTX 4090, at least when the 4090 uses DLSS FrameGen. I also tried FSR upscaling in FrameGen on the Nvidia card, just to see if it would see similar scaling, but it actually did worse with the pure FSR 3 solution. The best performance again comes from pairing DLSS upscaling with FSR FrameGen. You can see all the results in the final chart. The lighter green bars are for when we used either DLSS and FSR 3.1 FrameGen, or with the 4090 there's a pure FSR 3.1 result. Basically, with the current game code, AMD ultimately delivers the best performance at each pricing tier, with the exception of the $200 realm where the RX 6600 just fell flat on its face at 1440p and wasn't worth trying at 4K Ultra. That wraps up my God of War Ragnarok performance testing. Maybe if another patch comes out and radically improves Nvidia's performance we'll revisit the game, but for now this is how things stand. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to let me know in the comments what other games you'd like to see tested.